Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and balance coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello, everybody. I am back with part 2 of the episode with Dr. Sarah Baillie. We were talking last time about the fact that October is World Menopause Awareness Month, and we really wanted to dig in to perimenopause and menopause a little bit more. As I said last time, we talked about this in my very first episode of Bite Size Balance. Dr. Baillie was my first guest, and she has agreed to become a regular guest on here because everybody loves her, including me. I love talking to her. This podcast is a 2-part podcast. So episode 1, if you haven't listened to it yet, is available. This is the continuing conversation with Sarah about menopause, perimenopause, and women's awareness around both of those things. Hello again.
Hello.
We actually just saw each other like 10 minutes ago, so it's not actually
after a pee break.
Hello. Yeah, we had a little menopause break. Okay, so we're back. We were talking about in the first portion of this podcast, we were talking about some of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause, and I know there were a number of them that we didn't get into, and that you want to just kind of provide, because we don't want to leave listeners with the suggestion that those are the only symptoms of perimenopause. We talked about some of the ones that are more common, but there are so many signs and symptoms that can be attributed to hormonal change. So if you could just take a second and kind of go through that. I know you have a little list there that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so we talked about hot flashes. I wanted to just bring up things that are not necessarily the most common that people see. So as I said before, I often have women coming into my office with hot flashes, insomnia, anxiety. Those are kind of the top. The next thing they might bring up is loss of libido. That's usually not the number one, but that's part of it. So or not necessarily loss, but changing libido. Weight gain is often a concern, as well as hair loss. And I wanted to mention joint aches. So one of the things that happens when hormones change is that the tissues change. So tendons and ligaments change a little bit. And so sometimes women experience aching joints as part of a menopausal picture or a perimenopausal picture. And that's not always attributed to hormones. So I just wanted to mention that, especially if you're having, massage therapy or chiropractic or getting external treatment, body work for your joint pain, you may also want to consider the fact that there may be a hormonal link to it as well. Brain fog, memory loss. So what's really interesting, my husband and I call it loss of noun syndrome. So everything in my house is a thingy. Like there's nothing that everybody just knows now. We had a few discussions over the fact that nobody could understand what I was talking about ever because it was just a thingy. But now I attribute a color to it at least. It's like the black thingy or the green thingy but that loss of nouns, to be honest, I don't know the research behind this. I don't know that anybody's ever looked at why women lose their nouns around menopause, but it can be very frustrating, can feel very embarrassing in a work situation. I once sat at a Christmas party somebody asked me what the name of my colleague's twin sister was, and I looked at her for 20 minutes and I've known her for 20 years. I could not come up with her name, and I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what I talk about in my practice all the time. And but that actually gets better. So we'll talk about the things that do get better. That actually gets better once the kind of perimenopausal time is over. But yeah, so memory and brain fog. Some women have come to me thinking that they may have early onset dementia actually with some of the memory issues. And usually what we do is we talk about hormone balance. We talk about, we sort of run through whether or not it sounds severe enough to pursue that diagnosis. But also we talk about the fact that women sort of at this time of life are often overstretched in terms of their capacity to handle multiple things happening at once. And so that whether you remember where your keys are or not that takes more mindfulness. It takes more attention to detail. How present are you? Those are the questions we start to ask around that. But so loss of memory and brain fog are definitely sort of wrapped up in this. And it's also attributed to like lack of sleep and stress. I mean, if you're not sleeping well, then you're not going to remember stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Sarah. Sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking as you were talking, I just made a note because I thought at least two of the things you're talking about that are possibly connected to your hormones changing, libido and the kind of brain fog, memory loss. Like I can see that both of those things are just it's almost like a chicken and egg thing. Like, did it, because I'm thinking of myself, right? Like if you're somebody who has for like legit now 3 months not been sleeping, like I don't think I've had one night where I could say I have had 8 hours of sleep for sure. So you've got that going on, where you're really quite sleep deprived and exhausted. You're also like sweating half of the time, and you are, so you're exhausted. And then on top of that, you have, all of the other symptoms that are potentially connected to your hormones being a bit out of whack. Your libido is going to take a hit. And so is your ability to focus. And so it's almost like, I sometimes use this analogy when I'm trying to explain in coaching how women sometimes get to where they get to. It's like that idea of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's like all of these little things together get you to this place, right, where you just feel totally depleted, and it starts to manifest in a variety of ways. Some of these things, like, and they are on their own symptoms, but they're also symptoms that get just magnified as a result of all of the other symptoms contributing to them. And so one of the things that I say, and I'm not sure whether this is the case in terms of hormonal issues or not, and we are going to talk about some of the ways we can support better hormone management in a second. But one of the things I say is like oftentimes when we got somewhere by this kind of death by 1,000 cuts, the solution is like death by 1,000 Band-Aids, for lack of a better word. I know Band-Aids is the wrong word because we're always trying to treat the root, but you know what I mean? It's like healing by like a variety of modalities instead of just one solution. And that just kind of popped in my head as you were chatting there. I wonder if that might be the case as well sometimes with the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, most women, by the time they get to middle age, 45 and above, let's say, are adrenally exhausted. So we'll have a whole podcast about that. But that's kind of burnt out or on the edge of burnout. And so the capacity of women by the time they get to the time when their hormones are changing to actually maintain things like mindfulness around where they might put their keys, or trying to manage overwhelm, or trying to come up with the word for, I don't know, I want to say paper cutter now because of what you said with paper cuts.
And now you can't remember the word.
No, I can't remember the word, right?
Yeah.
How it's always multiple factors. There's never just one factor. The body is an intricate, amazing web of interconnection, and you cannot just say it's just hormones. You can't say it's just this, it's just that, it's just stress. And I mean, stress alone, as we will talk about, has an impact on every single cell in your body. So where managing stress 20 years ago might have felt you had the resources to handle it, at 45 you might not have those resources anymore because they've been depleted. There's an article recently that I read that was talking about our ability to handle stress is like your surge capacity, your ability to handle stress, handle big stressors, one thing after the other, diminishes when you've had multiple episodes of that, and then your resources just completely deplete. And so that is going to affect your ability to pay attention. That's going to affect your ability to remember things. The body doesn't want to prioritize stuff that doesn't seem important when you're depleted, right? And remembering that a can opener is a can opener or trying to, get a visual of what it is that you're trying to remember isn't necessarily always isn't always a priority for its energy use when there isn't a lot of energy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds a little depressing, what we're talking about right now, but I think that what both of us want to really emphasize is the fact that if it is in fact possible to support by in a variety of different ways this thing, then what that really means is that there's always something you can do to make it better.
Absolutely.
There's always something available to you, even when like the stress is really legitimately outside of your control. There are still things that you can be doing that will positively impact how you're feeling overall.
Of course, there are always ways. If we can identify them, then there are always ways to start healing those little cuts, so that eventually, and also time, so when you're sort of out of the emotional roller coaster of perimenopause and things settle down, then also the body is less sort of reactive all the time. So, memory and brain fog are big ones. And then the obvious is, which I can't believe we didn't mention at the beginning, is changes in your period. Right. So, I mean, there's the complete loss of your period, but then before that is, it can be, your periods can be really up and down. You can miss months, you can have super heavy months, you can have 2 periods in a month, you can have like all over the map again, like depending on the person. We want, with those sorts of things, we want to be paying attention, because we want to pay attention to blood loss and, iron levels and things like that. And so there are just so many symptoms that, I really don't like the word symptom. I sort of use it because it's common, but I think of it more of an expression.
Yeah.
And, it's a body expressing itself. So that's an obvious one that people think about with menopause and perimenopause. One of the things that they don't necessarily think about is urinary tract infections. So new onset, repeated urinary tract infections are often a sign of menopause, and the changes in the genital urinary tissues. And so it's really important to be trying to look after the quality of those tissues, so that you don't spend the next 10 years on antibiotics because of urinary tract infections. And the other one I wanted to mention is restless legs. So I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Wendy, but I certainly
haven't,
have.
but I've heard it's terrible, and I have not experienced it myself. No.
So it's kind of a feeling of electricity in your legs, or a feeling like, that you have to move them. And my family we have it all throughout, and my dad calls them TV legs. My mom's sitting in front of the TV and her legs start flying all over the place, and that's something that can really impact sleep, aside from the whole hormonal, night waking with sweats and things, is restless legs. And so that's often a symptom that comes at perimenopause and menopause as well. And then I have something written on my sheet here that I can't read my own writing. So
that's okay. I'm sure we'll come back to it at some point.
I just did want to tell you a funny anecdote about my first realization that I really was in perimenopause was when I showed up at work without a skirt on.
Oh my God. You told me that story. I died laughing. Yes.
I thought my whole office was going to lose it. It was so funny. It was just, I just took off my coat. I went about my business. I had tights on, obviously, or else I would have felt it. But at some point I looked down and I thought, oh my God, I have no skirt. And then I didn't change it. I just said to all my perimenopausal women, I was like, don't have a skirt on today.
Right. But listen, what's the message we were just talking about, like something we wanted to make sure we said in this second part
self-care.
Of the podcast, self-care, but also you are not alone. And I think that, that's one of the reasons why both of us are so happy to share our own experiences through this. Like, we are all going to go through this, and we're all going to go through it in a different way. It looks different for every woman, but I think, as with everything in life, it's such a relief when you know that you're in it you're in it with other people and you're not alone in it. So thanks for sharing that.
Keep another skirt at the office. Whatever you do, keep another skirt in your bag.
Oh my God. If there's anyone listening to this who has a story like that, we would love to hear it. Just send it. Please send it my way. You can always send me a message through any of my social media channels or on my website. I would love to hear those stories. Those would be funny to compile in an episode. Are there any other symptoms, or are you kind of through your list there?
Well, those are the biggies. Okay. And a lot of women just basically say, I just don't feel myself, the self that they've known themselves to be for the last 20 years. Right. And again, that's part of that transition. It's part of the change. It's part of that,
coming
looking
back
at it
home to yourself,
coming back home, and also realizing that it's the feeling of not feeling yourself doesn't have to be a loss. It doesn't have to be something, I mean, there will be parts that in the process of finding the next phase for yourself that will feel that you have to maybe grieve it.
Right.
However, there's it doesn't all have to be that, and that there are things to look forward to, even though, when I'm rattling off the symptoms, it doesn't sound like there are many things to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, that probably leads naturally to the next question I have, which is really, again, asking for a friend, as always. Not really. I'll tell you, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, like, what did I really know about perimenopause and menopause? And my mom ended up having a hysterectomy as a result of fibroids. And so her menopause was a different menopause than the type of what I'm going through, because I'm having more of what you would call like a natural onset of menopause. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really have any information from her on it. And I was just thinking the other day, like, I'm not even sure I was aware of the fact that perimenopause was a thing. I think I just had heard about menopause, and I knew menopause was going to happen at some point. And I associated, a lot of really awful symptoms with menopause. And then what happened is, of course, I started seeing the symptoms of perimenopause, which is, as you've said, can be, like anywhere from 5 to 10 years, I think, before the onset of full menopause. And so I started experiencing those symptoms, and, some of them were tough. And the biggest one for me was, I did have some night sweats that started up, but as I think I said in the first podcast, I stopped drinking alcohol, and I do want to talk about that a little bit as we go forward here. I stopped drinking alcohol. It made a massive difference in those. Those sort of disappeared there for a couple of years after I stopped drinking. But the other symptom that I had during perimenopause was just like, I really felt like it was so challenging to regulate my emotions. And I'd never really had that before. I'd always been a relatively, I think, steady person. But as I entered into kind of my 40s, it felt like I was yelling a lot. I was losing my proverbial shit on the regular about things that really in the big picture didn't matter that much. And that was really disconcerting to me. And my kids and my husband started making fun of me, and, it became just this thing. Right. And my point in all of this is that now I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I haven't even hit menopause yet. Like, what's coming next? Because the thing that I thought was actually like the worst of it in my kind of knowledge and awareness around menopause, it hasn't even happened yet. So am I in for like just all of this stuff, ratcheted up on steroids, or, is there some difference in terms of how women feel and what happens to them in perimenopause versus menopause? Is that, I kind of rambled a bit. Does that question
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That's a hard question to answer because everybody's bodies are so different. Yeah, if you go back to that chart, maybe you can put that chart back up with this episode, and with the other episode with the perimenopause versus menopause. You'll see
for anyone who's listening, the chart is on the website version of the podcast. So if you're listening to this on iTunes and you want to go see the chart, just go to my website, hit the podcast tab, and you'll be able to find the episode, and I put it up there. Haven't quite figured out how to get it up on iTunes yet. So that's just wendymccallum.com if you're looking for that. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Okay. So, so things flatten, the hormones flatten out. They go from kind of roller coastery to pretty steady over the 1 to 2 years after, sort of diagnosed menopause. how that shows up in people, well, my experience is that it shows up in a calming. So just like it looks pretty agitated
great
in the
news.
perimenopause.
Great news, Sarah. You just made my day.
Yeah. My experience is that it seems to calm down. And with that settling comes it's like a groundedness, if you will. And bear in mind that if you've fought menopause, really sort of resisted the changes and the transformations, then that may not be as steady a line in terms of calm. But if you've kind of embraced self-care and looking after yourself during that process, then generally I see it as a leveling out of the emotional state. The physical symptoms are entirely dependent on the person. So I looked this up last night. I think it was 27% of women, where I have it in my notes, 27% of women still experience hot flashes after 5 to 7 years after menopause.
Not so great news, Sarah. I'm liking you less now.
Wait.
Okay.
But they're not necessarily intense.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it might be like in the middle of the day, a couple of flashes a couple of times a week. Like it's not necessarily life disrupting. It's just that the literature notes that 5 to 7 years or 4 to 5 years on, the 27% of women still report hot flashes. It doesn't mean that they're the hot flashes of the first few years.
And I will say this, I did read something that was another statistic. I cannot vouch for its accuracy because again, I probably got it off of Google, but it was some research that was done that suggested that in contrast with that number that you just gave, I think it was 2/3 of women in the year before going into full menopause, 2/3 of women experience hot flashes and night sweats. So the number is like really high during that kind of period, like the period I'm in right now is really, really common. And so actually when you compare 2/3, 66% to 27%, we're talking about, more intense hot flashes and night sweats versus more sporadic and less intense. That actually sounds a whole lot more positive.
Yeah. I mean, so the general feel is that it's far more manageable, and the women in my practice who are in menopause or who I meet for the first time and they're actually fully in menopause are often looking back and saying, "Oh no, it's nothing like in perimenopause." Right? So they report their experience is much more diminished. Some of the things that do show up are so then we just have a different set of symptoms. So it's not as what am I going to say? I keep using the word roller coastery. It's not as up and down. I'm looking for there's that menopausal thing. I'm looking for the articulate word for that, but I don't have it. So
me neither. Can't help you.
What a shit show. 2 menopausal women trying to come up with a word. So variable. That's
perfect word, Sarah.
Yeah,
you should write that down though. Write that down.
I'll forget where I put it. So it's not as variable. So the women in my practice who are still experiencing sort of post-menopausal symptoms, some of them are related to anxiety and depression. And so sometimes we try and work with hormones then to try and manage that aspect of it. It may feel different than the perimenopausal kind of variability of those hormones, or of that experience. And so vaginal tissue is part of what we really want to support postmenopausally if women are experiencing it. Not all women experience vaginal changes, but we really want to support that, as I said before, to avoid urinary tract infections and painful intercourse and those sorts of things. And there are certainly ways to do that. So
and that's dry. Is that mostly dryness that you're talking about there when you say vaginal?
Usually dryness is the primary symptom. And so there are some creams, there's some natural creams, there's some pharmaceutical creams, there's some women use vaginal estrogen for that, tiny doses, just to support the tissue so that it doesn't lead to infection.
Okay, so the point is there is
of course
there is a solution. Do not panic.
There are things to do. Yeah,
there are things you can do. Okay, great.
you know, and I think some of it's familial in terms of like, I'll have, if I have a woman who's still having a few hot flashes or night sweats, you know, they're 5 to 6, 7 years into menopause, they will often report that their mother's 80 and also still has them occasionally. And so there seems to be a familial relationship there. So it's worth investigating what's gone on in your family as well.
Okay, that's great to know. Okay, well, that's pretty good news, I guess, overall.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would say it's not bad news.
No, and I will say that I was saying this to you earlier, that I have noticed, I mean, I don't want to jinx it because that's how I roll, but I have noticed that it does seem to be diminishing in terms of that general feeling of like being out of control a little bit sometimes, and I'm not having as many of those out of body experiences where I'm like watching myself in full Meno rage, you know, from above, and like wanting to change it, but not being able to stop what's happening. That's happening a lot less now, which I think is hopefully me slowly transitioning into that calmer phase. So that's positive. Let's talk about, you know, this is Menopause Awareness Month, World Menopause Awareness Month, and we're trying to increase awareness. So, you know, what are some things that you wish women were more aware about or knew more about around the hormonal changes?
Well, the first thing, and I've mentioned this in every podcast, the first thing is that I wish women knew more about perimenopause so that they can find a practitioner, whether it be their family doctor who's hopefully literate in perimenopause, or a naturopathic doctor or other healthcare provider who understands that some of the expressions of or symptoms of what they're experiencing, what they're bringing to the table, may be related to hormones. And then it doesn't just have to look like PMS in order for it to be related to hormones. So that, you know, sleep, anxiety, all of those things can be related to changes in the beginning of perimenopause. So I love it for women to be aware at 40 that these are things to just keep on the horizon, you know, just watch for them, because it's a fairly simple fix in a lot of cases to just calm that system down a little bit, manage the hormones, and can relieve a lot of future problems. So women, the perfect example would be women who sort of stop sleeping around 40, and it's not bad enough to really do too much about, but it's just sort of, oh, I'm a light sleeper, or 3 times a week I wake up in the middle of the night, maybe can't get back to sleep, that sort of thing. By the time you've done that for 5 years, you're fried, you know, and your whole system is suffering because of it. And then the real perimenopause kicks in, and then you're in trouble. So that's the stuff I'd really like to see early awareness around that, and to sort of demystify it, and also maybe like sort of empower women as opposed to making them afraid of the word menopause. You know, it's when it has the word menopause in it and you're only 40, you think it doesn't apply to you, or you think it's scary to think that you might be going into menopause. So I'd love, you know, I'd almost love a different word for it if you know, that would be helpful if it could mean that we could access more younger women. And then the other side of that is that I would really like women to know that they're not alone, that you know, all women in their 40s and 50s are experiencing some degree of this, whether they are acutely aware of it or not, and that it can be a time of great personal growth and transition, and it can that I would really love to take the approach that it's a time of real gain as opposed to loss, because society has told us, I mean, women have been the target of this for many years, but women have told us that we lose everything as we age, and I would like to reverse that. I would like to, you know, go back to the idea that the wise woman is actually it's a goal worth trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, I think it's the word crone. I have this resistance to the word crone because when I picture a crone, and I know that that's the word that's commonly used in terms of this next phase, the wise crone, I just picture this kind of, shriveled
Yeah.
up old like bubka with like a headscarf and a cane and
Yeah.
and so I have trouble with that. I would love to have this image of this just kind of glowing, grounded midlife woman. And one of the things that I'm hoping to have, I have a guest lined up for a subsequent episode. We're going to talk about women's roles in work, and one of the things that we both want to talk about is just this trend that we see in both of our professions where women are, it's almost like so many women now are just coming into their own when it comes to business ideas and like creative pursuits post 45 and 50. Like it's becoming that time, and I feel like we should just be celebrating that. And if that's what the Wise Crone looks like, sign me up. I feel like I'm there too. And I too am just really, I'm really invested in trying to change the stereotype around the perimenopausal and menopausal and postmenopausal woman and what that looks like, because I feel very strongly that, I'm about to go into potentially the best years. And, that's in large part due to the conversation I've had with you and what I've learned about this, but also I have the benefit of seeing this happen in my practice with all these women in their midlives that I support, and just seeing some of the incredible transformations that they're having and the incredible things that they're able to create for themselves when they just embrace the fact that this is their time.
Yeah. I mean, women, you've seen lots of kind of memes that go around that are like hot flashes or power surges and that sort of thing. It actually is an extremely powerful time. And so it's very possible that if we can help women embrace this time and embrace the power that comes with it, that honestly, we could change the world. I really believe that. I really believe that feminine, female, powerful energy, if we can actually nurture that, which comes back to that nurturing thing, like, okay, we've done the nurturing of everybody else. Now's the time to nurture this. That the potential in women over 45, sort of globally, is huge. If we can,
just got chills when you said that. That's why I was like squirming in my seat, because I think that's such an amazing perspective on this, and it totally resonates with me.
Just get everybody sleeping. That's like, you just got to get everybody sleeping first. Imagine.
Hashtag let them sleep.
Yeah, get the women to sleep. And then,
oh man,
and then that shift will happen. And it's just like really the idea of owning this period of life. Like, I remember when Oprah turned 40. I don't know how old Oprah is, but I remember when Oprah turned 40 for some reason, and she was just like, the 40s rock, like she was so excited because 40 seemed to be that one age that everyone was afraid of. And she demystified it, and she made it positive, right? Well, as far as I'm concerned, like 50, 60, we can totally push that to become the most vital time of our lives, really.
Yeah. I think we need to be focusing more on, less on the loss and more on the potential, the possibility, and then doing the work, for lack of a better word, to really invest in that. Like, put something into it, put a little equity into it. What am I willing to invest in myself in my 50s? And that's kind of the way I've been thinking now for the last few years. Like, it's not over for me yet, and I think I said this to you offline when we were chatting. Like, I have a husband who has been able to just build this incredible career in business over the last 20 years and really focus on that. And he's been a great dad and all of that stuff, but he has not been influenced by estrogen and the nurturing hormone in the way that I have. And he has not been turning all of his creative energy outward. He's been putting a lot of that into the business. And so now, and I said this to him the other night, like, I am not ready to retire in 5 years. Instead, I feel like this is now my time to do some of those things that, and I'm not suggesting that I am resentful for the fact that in my 30s, I was primarily a nurturer. I am grateful for the opportunity to have been able to do that. I absolutely am extremely grateful for that, and for being able to take care of all of the things and people that I took care of, and build a coaching practice. But I do feel like there's just this huge window that's opening up for me now, and I want other women to start looking for that for themselves, because I feel like it's there for all of us, you know, in this transition, turning, I don't know what the right word for it is. I think we used to call it the change. I'm putting that.
I hate that.
Me too.
I hate that.
I'm putting it in like air quotes, because I'm like, it's not a change. I'm not changing.
No. It's not a continuum.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that was a tangent. Thank you for that. I don't even know how that started. I'm trying to remember where we were.
As I said earlier, like, why bother doing this if we can't help to support women to find what it is that nurtures them? Yeah. And that they can bring that energy in a different form into their lives and into the world and into their relationships and into their, you know, whatever it is. You don't have to be an Oprah, but just do the thing that nourishes you. And part of the transition is trying to figure out what that is again, because you know, it often gets lost in all of that energy going outwards for all those years. And many women sit in my office and say, I have absolutely no idea what I like to do. I'm like, well, good time to start.
Yeah. Well, that's my coaching practice, Sarah. So it's, you know, if you're feeling that way and you're in your 40s or early 50s, I mean, you are definitely not alone in that. It is such a common thing. And I think it's so helpful to know that there's actually there's a physiological underpinning to that. Yeah. Like, you know, it makes sense from a societal perspective in terms of the norms and how we tend to conform to a lot of those norms. And then it also makes sense from a physiological perspective and a hormonal perspective. And I love that. So what are some of the, you know, I don't want to, we've touched on this over the course of all of the various times we've talked about this, but I really want to put it all together into kind of one thread in this conversation, I guess. The variety of ways that, you know, proactively women can support hormonal management, I guess, for lack of a better word. And again, before we get into this, I mean, Sarah and I have said this over and over again. Sarah is a naturopath, a licensed naturopath. I am not a naturopath. I am not a doctor. I am not a health practitioner. I do not treat or diagnose. I say that all the time. I am also an ex-lawyer, so I'm very, very careful about this. We are not providing any medical or health advice in this. We're just opening up a discussion around some of the various modalities and options for support that are out there for women to explore with their medical or health practitioner, whether that be a conventional medical doctor or a naturopath or somebody else. So with that disclaimer, Sarah, what are some of the options out there in terms of ways to approach this and support this?
Well, there's everything from using different seeds, like, you know, pumpkin seeds and flax seeds and different seeds that support hormone balance. Not hormone balance. They support production of the hormones at the various times in the cycle in perimenopause. Mm-hmm. So that's that, and using seeds and using phytoestrogenic foods, which we've talked about. Are one way to support your hormones. Making sure that you have lots of nutrient-dense food. So nutrient-dense to me is, excuse me, like lots of plants. So you get the micronutrients that help support your detoxification pathways. They help support cellular growth and repair. They help support as antioxidants. They help support brain health. All of those things. So using lots of plant-based foods in there to make sure that you're getting your micronutrients and your phytoestrogens. So we look at that. We look at managing sugar levels, and in my case, I really have to say that I'm a no caffeine kind of practitioner. There aren't many people that leave my office with a prescription for coffee. This is definitely not happening. And most of them have been primed by their friends or by listening to the podcast, but most people give up caffeine when
if you're going to go see Sarah.
So you have to give up caffeine.
Get ready.
So I'm sure there's a whole bunch of women out there who would really love to come see me, but aren't ready to
Yeah.
are ready to ditch the coffee.
Oh, but I can say this too. It's not as bad as you think it is, because this is, I think in the very first podcast, I was right at the beginning of my withdrawal from caffeine because of seeing Sarah. And I will say this, you get accustomed to it. You don't need to quit cold turkey. In fact, I personally would not recommend that with this at all. I would say just slowly reduce the amount of caffeine that you drink. So for me, I started with mixing the beans in the coffee grinder, half caffeinated, half decaffeinated, and then just, reducing the number of cups of that blend that I had. And now I'm at a point where I kind of, I might have 1 cup of that half and half, which I know I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. And then I just drink decaf for the rest of the day if I have coffee. And I could absolutely start my day without any caffeine now, after, what's it been, Sarah, like a couple months maybe since I started this, and I could start my day with no caffeine and I would still feel great. So it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. I will say that disclaimer. You have to wean off it. Yeah.
If you have any sort of addiction to it or dependence on it, you have to wean off it. And then you also, because you've been relying on that stimulant energy for many years probably, you also have to evaluate whether or not you need to support your adrenal glands, which now, there may be nothing giving you very much energy. So that's what we do, is we support that as well. So aside from food, we look at things like caffeine, alcohol, and sugar, all stimulants. And
can we just, sorry, Sarah, but can we pause for a second and just explain? So this is because I talk about cortisol a lot in my practice as a burnout coach. Can we just explain, my understanding is that when you have a blood sugar spike, you have a corresponding insulin spike, and there is also a little cortisol spurt as a result of that. So cortisol is released during that process. And also, if we're talking about alcohol, that when you consume alcohol, while alcohol is in fact a depressant, there is also there is a consequential action in your body to try to balance out that depressant effect, because your brain is trying to maintain that homeostasis. And one of the hormones that gets pumped out is cortisol in that situation too. So we're really talking about, I think we talk about stimulants, like things that, at least in part, have a potential impact on your cortisol, which is your stress hormone.
They ramp up your fight or flight.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which ultimately depletes your energy for maintaining those hormones.
Right.
And also just your general energy. And also, if your cortisol is overstimulated, then that messes with your sleep, because your body thinks that you are constantly being chased by a predator, and it doesn't understand. It doesn't understand that going to sleep is actually okay, right? It doesn't understand that the predator's not real. And so it's really unable to fully shut off.
Yeah.
Always going to have that hypervigilance around, like, where's the predator? And so, the alcohol, caffeine, and sugar sort of fit in that category. And again, that like narrow zone of thermoregulation that we talk about, I actually think that really applies to kind of a narrow zone of tolerance of all kind of stimulants, really, not just reflected in our ability to manage heat or manage the heat in our bodies. So that's kind of that's kind of foundation. And then in my practice, we'll next go to like herbal combinations, which I can't really talk about here because it's individual, but we'll look at herbal combinations to kind of manage the estrogen, progesterone up and downs in perimenopause. And then in postmenopause, we might want to be kind of supporting more estrogen production or more progesterone production. And
there's just for the people listening this on the herbal thing, the one thing that I learned from Sarah that was helpful to me is that there's quite a wide range there too. And so I thought I was like, I'm taking this witch's brew, as I like to call it, which has been quite helpful, but I've clearly moved into a new zone with hormones because it's not working as well anymore. And I thought that like the next step for me was necessarily something like non-herbal, maybe more, chemical bioidentical hormones or something like that. And Sarah said, no, you're just on entry level dose. I'm actually just a baby when it comes to the herbal spectrum. Apparently there's more available. So I just wanted to share that. I mean, again, we're not providing any specific guidance on this, but just know that it's not just one thing. It's quite a complex part of
Yeah.
the practice, Sarah, is that herbal
Right.
side of it. Yeah. Yeah.
And if something stops working, then we shift it up a bit. And if it's, something might work for a while and then you feel really good, and then we decrease the dose to see if actually you're sort of maintaining on your own for a while, and then that might all clear up again. And it's a lot of it's dependent on what's going on in your life, and some of it's depending on diet. And so the so that's kind of the bulk of what I do. I also support, I just have to plug in my computer here. I also support the adrenal system and the liver. So we use foods like cruciferous vegetables, for example, like the cauliflowers, broccolis, kales, all of those, in order to manage estrogen detoxification through the liver. So we use all of those. And am I really messing things up here? My computer's going to die, so I'm just trying to plug her in here. So food is a big part, and then we look at lifestyle, right? So bedtimes are pretty significant, especially if you haven't been sleeping well for a long time. Bedtime can get really messed up because a lot of women stay up later than they think later than they should, because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to sleep. And so it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, the whole sleep issue. And I know you talk a lot about sleep with your clients, but sleep is my number one priority in practice. Sleep and mental health come first. I don't care if you're having hot flashes all day. If you're not sleeping, the first thing I'm doing is looking at your sleep, because we can't actually move forward until you're sleeping. That's kind of my number one priority.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
That and anxiety, kind of just taking the edge off everything and sleeping. And then after that, we sort of tweak and play around with whatever needs to happen. From a mental emotional perspective, I challenge women to think about how they feel about the aging process. So what did your mother's experience, how did that inform you? You probably didn't know your grandmother's experience, but how did they talk about aging? Did they talk about it in a positive way, or did they talk about it in a way of depletion, implied depletion? Did they buy into the stereotype, or did they resist the stereotype? That's going to tell a lot about what you internalized as a growing woman, about how you feel about aging. And really challenging those things, I think, is important to an important part of going through this transition, because as we know now, old patterns and old systems in our body, things that we've taken on in childhood, will often stop us from moving forward if we don't address them. And if you didn't address them in your 20s and 30s, at perimenopause, they will come up again, and you'll need to address them again.
Yeah, it's that whole thing, you got to like go through it to get through it. You got to actually feel it to heal it, or whatever all the corny phrases are. But like that idea that, this thing is just going to keep coming up if you don't deal with it. And like we were talking about, I think in the last part of this episode, in part one of this episode, like that it's almost like this is perimenopause, and menopause is like a warning system on that. It's like, you can't leave it that much longer. You really should deal with that stuff now. So I love that. I mean, we in coaching, of course, like this plays out in coaching, and this idea of like limiting beliefs and stories that we tell ourselves, just these continued loops that we have around what is the truth. We truly believe these things to be true, but when we dig into it in coaching, and we really work through the evidence of its truth, and then the evidence that it's not true, and we start thinking about how that possibly not true story is actually serving us, and what it's leading to in terms of how we feel and our behavior and our actions, then we can actually come up with something that feels as true or truer, that does serve us and that does allow us to move into this. And so I love the potential of all of this in coaching. Just selfishly, as I'm thinking this through, I'm thinking, well, this is really such a natural, it's just such a natural part of life coaching, to be talking about these things and these stories that we have around what menopause looks like and what aging looks like for us as women, and the power that is there for us to change the story and change the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, individually and in our relationships. So, if we were to look at, when you said what are the kind of steps for prevention, or not prevention, but steps to sort of get ready for support, the transition, one of the things is just to stop and reflect on the fact that this is a transition for you, that you are going through it. And to really look at what as you say, what are your belief systems around it, and how do you want to go through it? What is your desire at the end of this? How do you want to end up on the other side of this? What does that picture look like for you? Those are good questions to ask yourself.
Well, and too, as a parent, Sarah, you have a daughter, I have a daughter. As a parent, I'm thinking to myself, like, what's the potential upside, the power here to role model something different than whatever you might have been role modeled, and whatever your story is based on. What's the potential there to change that for my daughter? Like, I would love for my daughter to, to talk, which I do. I've talked to them about why I yell. I've talked to them about why I don't sleep. I've talked to them about all that stuff. But I also think, wouldn't it be great if I could role model that I actually, had this incredible decade post-menopause, or maybe few decades post-menopause, where I was able to accomplish all kinds of things as a successful woman, and that this actually was just, another exciting part of life for me.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to stop and acknowledge that it's happening. That's the first, is back to the awareness. It's just back to the awareness. And one of the things that we talked about, that it's kind of all over my practice, really, that I don't think anybody gets out of my office without us having the conversation, and I know you wanted to talk about it, but it's the idea of really starting to, along with this, these feelings of irritability or resentment that are coming around, catering to the outside world, is to actually find ways to say no to things that you don't actually feel will be supportive to you or nourishing to you. And so I use the term to help women. I know you have some really good ideas, Wendy, but one of the ways that I say is I really like the term to say, or the statement to say, I'm at capacity. So I think people understand that instead of just saying no, most people will resonate with the idea that I just have too much on my plate, or not even too much. I'm full. This is it. This is all I've got, and I actually cannot do this other thing for you. And I'm sorry, but I'm at capacity. And I really liked that when, I can't remember who told me that, but I really liked it. I thought it resonated well with it kind of took away that any sort of guilt that I had around saying no to things. Just like, no, I'm at capacity. There's actually nothing left here to give to this organization or to this situation, or to, I will pick up the brownies at the superstore. I am not going to bake them.
I will not bake them.
Sorry, not baking them.
I think that's a really great example of what I call a script. When I'm working with women on how to say no more often, which is such a hard thing for us as women, I think for a variety of reasons. I think we are raised, not always, but a lot of us have been raised to be helpful, to be helpers, to be polite, for sure. And it feels rude or impolite or unhelpful to say no when you're asked to help with something. And so that can be really hard for a lot of women to do. And it is one of the reasons why we get ourselves in the pickle that we get ourselves into around just being completely run down and burnt out. So in my burnout prevention practice or burnout recovery practice, this is a huge piece of it, this idea of saying no. And one of the things I talk about a lot in my practice, and also in corporate wellness, if I'm doing presentations, is this idea of like a script around saying no, because it can be very, very helpful when you're trying to get better at saying no. Because how on earth are you going to take care of yourself if you can't make the time to do some stuff to take care of yourself? Right. And in order to, free up some time, which is, something that most of the people I work with say, I don't have time for that, Wendy. And I'll say, all right, well, let's find it. One of the best ways to find time is to start saying no to things so that you're not putting more things on your calendar. And the idea of a script is just what you said, like coming up with something that feels good to you, that feels, it has to be truthful, and it has to feel polite, really, for women to really buy into it. And so the script can vary. The one you just gave is great. I'm at capacity. You know, the one that I use a lot is that, you know, that sounds like a really interesting opportunity, but I've made a commitment to my kids since they're in grade 11 that I'm going to just try to spend as much time with them as possible before they leave home. So I'm going to have to say no. Again, that is true for me. My kids are in grade 11, and so it feels good to say it because it's not dishonest. I'm not making up some lie about why I can't help. But also it feels polite. It doesn't feel rude to me. It feels honest. And in my experience, I'm often talking to other parents who are asking me to help, and they get it, you know, when I say that. And I have a work script that I use as well, which is, you know, I'd love to speak at that event, but I don't have my calendar with me. Can you do me a favor and send me an email, and then I'll check my calendar and get back to you. And in that situation, I haven't said yes, which is the first step. Don't say yes on the spot ever, because when you get caught on the spot, you're almost never thinking about whether the thing's going to serve you or not. You're just saying yes because you don't want to be rude, and it's awkward. Yeah. So just the mere fact of not saying yes on the spot is great. But what I also do with that script is I put the ball back in their court. They now have to send me an email to remind me, which honestly, half the time they don't. So I get out of it that way. And most importantly, I have the opportunity to actually look at my calendar, consider the request, and figure out whether in the grand scheme of things, it is something that I want to do and it does serve me. And oftentimes it is, and I say yes to it. But what it has done is it's really prevented the number of times that I say yes on the spot, which I think is important. So I love that idea of a script. And there, you got to find something that feels true to you and that doesn't feel rude. You know, honestly though, I just want to say this too, Sarah. It is totally okay to just say no. Yeah. And you know, we have to get better as women. Totally. And just like, we just have to say no. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to generalize here, but I don't think it's nearly as hard for the majority of men to say no as it is for the majority of women. So I think we also just need to own the no. Yeah. There's your next hashtag. Hashtag own the no. I think we need to do that because, you know, that in itself is just such a superpower if you can just get good at saying no. But anyway, if you're not there yet, don't worry, I'm not either. I still use a script, and that's one of my best tips around that. But I do think saying no is probably one of the most important things, because that then opens up the space, like I said, for some time for you to engage in some of the things that Sarah's been talking about and I've been talking about in terms of like true self-care and actually supporting your body through perimenopause and menopause, and maybe even helping to manage some of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. I asked Sarah on the break between these two parts of this podcast, I asked her about exercise because I had just curiosity just based on my own experience. I have been focusing on trying to take care of myself more in the last few years. And I want to say this, if you haven't been and you're listening to this, it's totally okay. You know, I didn't start focusing on myself again until I realized that it was like I really needed to do that. So I think if you're listening to this and you're just getting aware around this now, that's totally okay. You can start now. But one of the things that I started doing a couple of years ago is I thought I really have to figure out a way to make time for me to exercise regularly again. I need to find also something that feels really joyful to me that I absolutely love. And so I tried a bunch of things, and a bunch of stuff did not work for me, but I finally found a gym and a kind of a format that I love. And I've been doing that really regularly, but it's somewhat intense because that's how I roll and it's what I like. And I said to Sarah, like, is there a chance that that's making these night sweats worse, you know, that I'm exercising? And I loved her answer. So can you please tell everybody what the answer to that was, Sarah?
Oh my God, I don't remember.
Can you remember? You said, that's so funny.
I was panicking. I was thinking she's going to ask me what it was. I don't remember what I said.
What you said was, because I was worried that, you know, because I sweat a lot when I'm working out because it's a fairly intense workout, and I was worried that it was making it worse. And you said what I hoped was the answer, which was, you know, because I hadn't noticed a difference. You know, I was going all the time, and and I was worried that maybe it was just making it worse at night, the days that I exercised. And I think your answer was, there's probably a good chance that your symptoms would be just that much worse if you weren't exercising. Yeah. That was your response.
Well, I mean, so that you don't know if your symptoms would be worse if you weren't exercising, unless you had a control time, right?
Sure.
So we can assume exercise is good for everybody. Joyful movement, important for everybody. Getting a little bit of strength training in there somehow, whether it's using your body or using weights, it's important for maintaining your muscle mass, which is important for a lot of things. But the one thing I will say about exercise is that if you are exercising sort of frenetically in order to lose weight, or within a sort of an agenda, or even if you're exercising a lot to reduce stress, sometimes if you're pushing your body, if you're adrenally fatigued and you're pushing your body to do this exercise, then you could be making the whole thing worse.
Right. You talked about that last time, and and that's an important point. I mean, and it's a complicated point too, because
it is.
Yeah. So, we're not, I think, like, neither one of us is suggesting that you shouldn't exercise, but at the same time, I think it's a really valid point. Like, at some point, exercise can become a form of physical stress that actually contributes to the problems that stress is causing. And so, you probably have a complicated way of figuring that out, Sarah, when you're working with individuals one-on-one, but it is something that, I was kind of trying to work that through in my own mind. I think, like, could I be making this worse by, this thing? But then the truth is, I also, and Sarah, you may disagree with me on this, but I feel strongly that women have some real intuition around this. And if you get really honest around this and you ask yourself, like, how do I really feel about this? How is this exercising making me feel? How's it making me behave? And I love it. I feel amazing. I feel so great after it. It's so important to me. I feel so much more balanced mentally. And, so for me, my gut tells me that this thing is actually overall a good thing for me. And if you, I think, I've had times in my life when it hasn't been. When I've had a form of exercise in my life, like when I was running half marathons, where every Saturday night I was dreading the fact that tomorrow was long run day, and, running just became a chore and another stressor for me and something I had to do. So I think, it's very much based on the circumstances, the individual, where you are with all of it. But so those are some of the lifestyle, we talked about a few of the lifestyle things that support that can be helpful in supporting in this area. We talked about exercise. We talked about, just generally trying to get aware. And we talked in previous podcasts about using, incorporating practices that help to just generally calm us. Things like meditation, things like gratitude. Well, we're going to talk more about all this stuff, you guys, when we get into, we're going to do a whole podcast on burnout and adrenals. And we have lots of other episodes planned. We were talking earlier about how great it would be to do an episode really focusing on the main pillars of health, just wellness generally for everybody, but specifically women. So a lot of these things will come up again and again, but I feel like, Sarah, we've covered off the big things we wanted to cover today. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
I just wanted to share something about my experience with the idea of capacity. Is that in trying this out myself in my life, I've always been pretty good about saying no, but with kids now, I find it a little bit more challenging because there's, swim teams to support and various, there's always something that you can be doing. But my experience with saying I'm at capacity has been so interesting, because sometimes the part of my brain that is programmed to do this will say, well, actually, you're not fully at capacity because you had 20 minutes to read on the couch the other day. So there's that this can kind of slip in. And what I'm realizing now is that I'm adding to my capacity self-care time. So within that, saying I'm at capacity, that capacity doesn't necessarily have to mean this toxic busyness that comes in our modern world. The capacity for me also includes that I just want to sit on the couch for an hour.
Yeah,
I don't want to do the raffle. I'm not interested in doing the raffle. I want to let the 30-year-olds do it. Hashtag. Right. I want to sit on the couch and read my book. Yeah,
and I think that's really important. That's the idea that that your capacity necessarily needs to incorporate what true balance looks like for you. And so capacity, just because you have extra time doesn't mean you have extra time. And I think it ties in really nicely. One of my favorite quotes is by Bertrand Russell. and I'm probably going to get it partly wrong, but it's the time that you enjoy wasting is not wasted time. And I really love that, because I think it's really important for us to stop writing off time that, where we technically maybe didn't do anything as wasted time. It's not wasted time. Sometimes wasting time is the most valuable thing that you can do if it's pleasurable for you, whatever it is that you're doing in that. And I think that that's probably a great way for us to kind of wrap up this discussion around like lifestyle things, because that's also something for people, to consider, like trying to shift your perspective on that. There is great value in downtime. Really great value in it, especially.
That leads right into the adrenal conversation.
There we go.
There you go.
We will be back.
See you next time.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for this. This has been a really great podcast. Thank you. For anybody who's looking for more information on Sarah, you can find her at Halifax Naturopathic, or you can find her on Instagram now at Meno Whisperer. And if you're looking for more information around me, you can find me on my website at wendymccallum.com or on social media at Wendy McCallum Coach. We will be back. Hope you enjoyed that episode, everybody.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. To be sure you don't miss any upcoming Bite Size conversations, subscribe now to this podcast. For more balance and wellness tips or to connect with me, visit my website at wendymccallum.com. That's WENDYMCCALLUM.com.